When I encounter resistance to change, when I encounter resistance to doing the deep personal work that it requires to transform one's life or one's community or one's organization, one of the things I'm very aware of is that it has to do with the fear of a threatened identity.
Welcome to Behind Beliefs, Behaviors, and the Brain, your communication podcast, where we bring brain science and communication strategy together to transform how we lead, connect, and thrive. I am your host, Dr. Maisha Claiborne, mom, physician, coach, consultant, and lover of all things brain and behavior. I also happen to be a trained expert in cultivating trust and safety through trauma-informed communication. Now, you may be wondering, what the heck does that mean? No worries. On this podcast, you will come to understand it all. Together each Monday, we will explore and uncover what drives our beliefs, shapes our behaviors, and influences our communication, from individual relationships to organizational culture. Each week, we dive into the science behind trust and safety, relating, communicating, and breaking through limiting beliefs that hold us back. So listen up, because whether you're a leader, a parent, a spouse, or just some amazing individual trying to get the tips for operating in your highest self, on this podcast, you will learn how to harness the power of the brain to create real change in your relationships, your leadership, and your life. Tune in every Monday morning and remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now let's dive in and start reshaping communication from the inside out. It's time to transform one conversation at a time.
Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode. I'm grateful to be here with you, and I'm grateful for you as a listener on this podcast. Now, before I move forward, I'm going to ask you to go ahead, if you haven't already, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss another episode if you happen to be one of our new listeners. And whoever referred you to this podcast, just thank them for me. I really appreciate the ripples that these podcasts create. And if you are someone who is listening for the first time or listening for a long time, I appreciate you sharing this with your community, because my commitment is certainly to empower the people who I touch and to bring very applicable, specific tools around expanding our communication, expanding our capacity to manage difficult conversations, expanding our emotional intelligence, and expanding our capacity to even teach and model for other people and thrive in unfavorable conditions. And so, with that, I want to talk about identity today, because one of the things that I notice is that the resistance that when I go into organizations or even communities, or even when I'm working one on one with people, when I encounter resistance to change, when I encounter resistance to doing the deep personal work that it requires to transform one's life or one's community or one's organization, one of the things I'm very aware of is that it has to do with the fear of a threatened identity. And so when we think about identity, we have to understand what it is specifically and how it impacts who our relationship with ourselves. And so let's start with what identity is. Identity is this constructed sense of self. And it is constructed. It is not something that we're born with. We're not born with identity. We're born as a blank slate. You think of babies, and when they're born, they're a complete blank slate. And then we imprint upon our caregivers, whomever they might be, our initial caregivers, and we begin to navigate the world. And as we navigate the world, we're gathering information and we are learning, distinguishing object from object, person from person. And then we get to a certain age as we've distinguished objects, and we begin to distinguish personalities. So we begin to respond to emotions and to personalities and to communications. And as we're doing that, we're actually absorbing and in absorbing that information and learning that information, these behaviors and things that are being modeled to us, communications that are being modeled to us. And when we get old enough to understand what a belief is, these beliefs are becoming inherited and ingrained. And as that happens, and especially as we move from sort of imprinting period into our modeling period, then we begin to, this is when our identity begins to be formed, right? We're absorbing, we're starting to go from imprinting into our school years, we're meeting friends, we're getting information from teachers and educators, and even from our family circles, our extended family circles. And we're again, we're things are being modeled to us, and we're taking on this sort of identity. We're starting to form these identities, but the identity doesn't truly really get formed until later in life. So once we move out developmentally out of this modeling period, we move into this socialization period. And these are periods that are defined by Dr. Massey, and there are probably many different paradigms of development, but this is just one of them, right? So we move into this socialization period, and up to this point, we've imprinted, we've started to develop a personality, we've learned certain habits. Again, identity is still kind of getting constructed, but we're not developmentally mature enough as young people to declare what that identity is. Yet, when we start to get into our teens and our 20s, that's when we start to grapple with this concept. But keep in mind, this identity over time was constructed. It was constructed by the values that we were taught. It was constructed by the beliefs that we inherited, by the attitudes that we inherited, and by all of the things that were modeled to us along the way. And the thing about identity is that our identity expands and our identity can change. But we're not taught that part, right? We are constructing this identity unconsciously. And so we think that that is who we are. We think that that identity is fixed and it is real and it is permanent. So then what happens is it gives us a sense of security. And that's why when identity is threatened, people bristle, people act in extreme ways. And that's why people become very intense when they feel that their sense of self is being threatened. And so the identity is a construction that we have created over time based on the values and the beliefs and the attitudes that we have inherited or that have been modeled to us. And it gives us a sense of self, which gives us a sense of security in knowing who we are and what our place is in the world. And that's sort of that sense of belonging, like who do we belong to? What groups do we belong to? And anthropologically speaking, belonging is a very important thing because back in the day, when there were hunters and gatherers, people stayed in packs because if you strayed from the pack, then your life could be in danger. You could become prey. And so when we think about identity and belonging, it makes sense that when one's identity is threatened or perceived to be threatened, that the brain would perceive that as danger. And when a person's identity is threatened, all types of things, all types of things happen. All types of behaviors and communications can come into play. And it's important to understand this because when we understand it, we can begin to recognize what's happening in specific communications when people become defensive. So why this is relevant is because we see this on a day to day basis. We see this in the resistance that people have to change, because change can be a threat to security. It can be a threat to security because it could be a threat to identity, right? To one's beliefs or values. It could be a threat to those, which then unearth that sense of security and safety. Now, granted, this is all perceived and this is all based on a person's values. So I'll share with you my story of transition and how that occurred for my identity. So, as a physician, when you're trained, when you go to medical school, you're conditioned in a very particular way. And the community says you can only either be a clinician or you could be a researcher or you could be an academician. And that is all that you can be. And, being an entrepreneur is bad, and leaving medicine to do something else would be a waste of time. And there are all these beliefs and attitudes that we are conditioned into as we're doing our training and moving through our educational path. If you're not doing medicine this way, then you're not a real physician or you're a quack. This is a lot of what I was conditioned to coming up in my educational path, but I chose a different path. Now, initially, I went to school and trained to be a family physician, but I was always interested in integrative medicine. Way back in the day before integrative medicine was actually called that. And so when I decided I wanted to do integrative medicine, back then called alternative medicine, it was stepping outside of the traditional identity of what a physician looked like or would be. And I will admit that during that time, making that transition was very challenging because, well, number one, I was being called a lot of things like quack, or like, I was being looked at in a particular way. And that came on top of my own identity, that came on top of my own feeling of isolation because I didn't quite belong all the way in the community of physicians, but I didn't belong in the non-physician community. I had my foot in both sides, in both fields. And so there was sort of this space of isolation, like where did I belong? And so inside of that, I struggled in my career because I wasn't exactly sure um, how to talk about what I did and how I helped people. Now, eventually, I settled in and I was able to find the words and I was able to sort of settle into the confidence of what I had learned and what I knew. And so then when I decided I wanted to transition out of clinical medicine, that became a whole nother um, transition and identity threatening process, an identity transition. Because once again, I had my foot in two different industries, in the coaching industry and in the medical industry. And this was at a time before coaching was popular, even well known about in the medical community. And so once again, there was this identity transition or really expansion for me, threw me into this space of feeling like I didn't belong because I didn't identify totally with the life coach uh, designation, because I was wholly, still a physician. And I still am a physician by training, but then I wasn't clinical. And so, where was my place, right? What was my identity? And finally, as I again began to settle in and find the language for how I helped and empowered people, I could stand inside a new identity of the both and. And that happened again, transitioning into this role, this sort of role that I am now as a consultant, as a physician, as a coach. And now I occupy several identities and again had to then expand what that identity role is. Now, what I'll share about that is in that process, what that took is for me to be willing to stand inside that unknown space and to redefine the beliefs that I had about myself in the past and the beliefs that I had about what I was stepping into and remind myself of what my own values were. And doing that allowed me to connect with and expand who I knew myself to be. All right. But in that interim, in that space of identity transition, I did feel a sense of lostness. I did feel a sense of fear. I did feel a sense of what am I doing and why am I trying to be different? I wanted to go back to being comfortable within the norm. And so I say that to say that when people's identities are threatened, when people resist change, it is often because they feel a threat to their identity. On an extreme level, when people's roles and identities are threatened, they might turn to extreme actions and extreme communications and extreme behaviors. And that is how we have, that's a lot of how we've gotten where we are societally today. Is the bottom line is people are feeling that their identities are threatened when, in essence, there's just a shift of tide towards equitability, and that feels like a threat to those identities. And so, with that, I offer something for those who experience resistance in the face of change. Ask yourself, where am I feeling a threat to my identity, to my belonging, to my role in this, whether it's relationship, family, community, society, organization, world? Where am I feeling a sense of fear, a sense of threat to my identity? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, how can my identity expand to include something new that doesn't exclude me? How can my identity expand to include something new that doesn't exclude me? And what growth is possible by expanding my identity, by expanding my purpose? All right. So, if you are a person who feels that threat to your identity, and I'm speaking of specifically of dominant culture feeling a threat to their identity, because let's be clear, there are marginalized identities that are being threatened. There are marginalized identities that are being threatened as an action. But then there are dominant identities that are perceiving a threat and in fear are imposing oppressive values. And marginalization, we mostly think about at the global and societal level, can also happen at the micro level. It can happen at the level of corporate, it can happen at the level of family, and it can also happen at the level of friend group, community, small group, family, and relationship. Marginalization just means othering, right? So whatever the container is, if you are in the position or the dynamic of power and your identity is feeling threatened, then you want to ask yourself these questions. All right. So, what is it that I feel that is being threatened about my identity? What is the fear? What am I afraid that I'm not going to get, or what am I afraid that I'm going to lose? And how can my identity be expanded so that I don't feel included, but I am a part of the whole? And how can I expand myself? What do I need to develop in order to expand my identity so that everyone feels included, right? So these are the questions that we ask ourselves. And you can take these questions not only to your families, to your communities, to your organizations, but we can start asking these questions out in society and the world as well. All right. So just remember that a lot of times when there's resistance, it's typically because people are feeling that their identities are threatened. And that does not justify any harmful behavior, but it does help be able to see that perspective, to know how to communicate with a person that might be feeling that their identity is threatened, to be able to lean in. And that does not necessarily justify anyone's harmful behavior. But it is interesting to be able to understand that so that we can navigate the world with very clear view of what's happening and to be able to take care of ourselves and communicate with compassion accordingly. All right. So if you found this of value, then let me know. If you have questions, let me know. Um, I will put a poll up on this episode so you get to engage. We love engagement. I love engagement. If you have questions or you have episodes that you want to see on this podcast, please let me know. Email me, Dr. Maisha at drmaisha.com, or you can email me on whatever platform you share with me and give me your suggestions because I'm listening. Share this episode, share it with a friend, the family, a colleague, or your leadership. Share this episode because I think that these are questions that we need to be having. These are discussions that we need to be having. These are questions that we need to be asking in our communities so that we can create a new discourse and begin to understand each other and communicate, interact, and reclaim our empathy and our humanity in this society. And of course, if you want to know about the work that I do, then you know where to find me, mindremappingacademy.com. Again, I thank you for listening because without the listeners, there is no podcast. And so go out, practice these tools, ask these questions, share this episode, and until the next time I see you, stay empowered.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode. We truly appreciate our listeners because without you, there is no podcast. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and that it gave you fresh insights and practical tools to elevate your communication and build trust and safety in all areas of your life, from leading your teams to strengthening your relationships at home. If today's conversation resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, share this episode, and leave us a 5-star review. Your support helps us reach more people looking to enhance their relationships, their leadership, and the communication in every area of their life. If you are ready to take your communication to the next level, I encourage you to check out our Communication That Transforms online course. This course dives deep into creating psychological safety, mastering trauma-informed communication that allows you to build behavior flexibility and tackle any circumstance in your life. You'll learn practical strategies for handling difficult conversations, navigating conflict, and cultivating trust in a way that truly resonates with the people around you and leaves them feeling seen, heard, respected, valued, and welcome. This course is designed to help you transform not only how you lead, but how you show up in all your relationships, whether in the boardroom with your teams or at home with your family. Check out the course at mindremappingacademy.com/TICC to learn more, see the full course catalog, and register. This link will also be in the show notes. That's www.mindremappingacademy.com/TICC. Finally, if these topics resonate with you and you want to bring them to your department, your team, or your organization, I'd love to speak with you. reach out to me and invite me in for a workshop or a conference tailored to elevate your organization's trust, collaboration, communication, safety, and belonging. You can learn more and reach out to me by visiting mindremappingacademy.com/corporate-programs. Remember, change happens one intentional conversation at a time, with one small shift in how we connect, listen, and lead. Keep listening with intention and communicating with clarity. And until the next episode, stay empowered.